We now return to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute, the radio show discussing the honest truth about Illinois policy and politics. Here's AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with Jacob Huebert, lead attorney for the Liberty Justice Center, on this edition of Illinois Rising. And Jacob, recently, His Eminence, the 45-odd year serving 14th Ward Alderman of the city of Chicago, City Council Finance Chairman Ed Burke, he introduced an ordinance to ban driverless car technology in response to the city of Pittsburgh pursuing experimentation with driverless car technology. Ed Burke came on to the morning show I co-host with Amy Jacobson just about a week ago and had this to say in terms of the rationale for his proposed ban.
Well, I think that right now there is a lack of understanding about these devices, and shouldn't we, first of all, ban them, and then if they prove to be safe and reasonable, then the use of these driverless vehicles can be authorized.
Yeah, so what about that, Jacob? First ban something, and then if the technology can advance despite the government prohibition, if it survives that thumb on it of government, then we can consider incorporation.
Well, yeah, that's normally how you do things in a free country, right? You just ban everything until the likes of Ed Burke decide that it's safe enough for you to have. I mean, that's the way we've proceeded with every other product we enjoy. So, yeah, I mean, driverless cars, why not? Well,
to add to our understanding of this issue, and now not to suggest that Ed Burke is not omniscient, because he clearly is, but we're pleased to be joined by Ron Bailey. He is a Reason magazine, Reason.com science correspondent. And also, I mean, I've read Ron Bailey's work for, 20 years. When did you write EcoScam? That was about 20 years ago, wasn't it?
It was a little over 20 years ago, yes.
Yeah.
I have a new book out called The End of Doom, which is an update, so
great.
Get a hold of that.
It's always worth reading, well-researched, and you've written on this topic of driverless car technology that's being pursued in cities like Pittsburgh, and it's being blocked in cities like Chicago. What's your take on the prospects for improving the human condition associated with driverless car technology?
Well, if the government will get out of the way, they will be on the road, lots of them on the road, and available for people to at least pick up on ride-sharing and ride-hailing services like Uber or Lyft in less than 5 years. But we have to get the government out of the way. And I was kind of horrified to read about what was going on in Chicago. With all due respect to the elected representatives of the great citizens of that city, the two guys who are proposing to ban it are in the pockets of the taxi commission. They're not looking out for the people of Chicago. They're doing protectionism. Or is that just too blunt?
No, that's a description of reality. And I suppose, Ed Burke suggesting that it's a safety issue, too, Alderman Ed Burke, the Chicago alderman who's taking the lead here. Not just the jobs issue, protecting all those driver jobs, but also it's a safety issue, too. And he points to, an accident here and an accident there. And so what about that, the safety of driverless cars versus, people behind the wheel?
Well, you have to keep it in mind that 94, it's estimated by the federal government transportation department that 94% of all accidents are due to human error. And what will happen with this technology, it will dramatically reduce those errors. In fact, right now, if you look at like the Google cars, their rate of accidents is about half of what it is for humans driving the same million miles at this point, and it's only going to get better from there. So calling it a safety issue is just nonsense.
Do you think that people are going to sufficiently recognize the benefits of driverless cars to overcome this resistance from special interests? Because it just seems to me that, like, the special interests, not only the taxi drivers, but also, say, semi-truck drivers, of which we have a great many across the country, they're going to be a face on the potential cost of this technology. Is there going to be enough of a face for the other side, enough of a compelling story for the other side to make people recognize that we need this, especially when a lot of people are probably thinking, I like driving my car. I'm not, they don't really feel like fighting to give up the ability to drive their car. You think there's going to be enough demand for it to overcome that political resistance?
Oh, absolutely. Some of the studies that I've looked at basically point out that if this stuff gets going, that everybody's transportation costs will be about a third of what they are now. That is, it'll be a lot cheaper for you to use these services in major cities than it would be for you to own and drive your own car. And so just on price and market alone, people are going to be very tempted to switch over to these cars. And of course, we had back at the turn of the 19th century and 20th century, there were the carriage drivers and as the proverbial buggy whip makers were opposing automobiles, and there were all kinds of legislation against them, and that failed, and that's going to fail in this case too.
Now, just a practical question. I wonder if you've looked into this. Is it possible to bring this technology online, even if it's just for ride sharing or other kind of commercial transportation, and still provide people with the option to drive their own cars?
I think that's going to happen for a while, but but over time, what you're going to see is that people are going to prefer this other service. Most driving that people do, let's face it, in most cities and so forth, is no fun at all. You're running around in streets that are backed up with traffic. You can't find parking. In fact, some of the studies basically point out that about 25 to 30% of congestion in center cities is the result of people driving around trying to find parking. And that kind of thing will go away. A driverless fleet of cars, something like if you had Uber everywhere kind of thing, would reduce the number of the cars on the road in a city, providing the same amount of transportation service to everybody by 90%.
Well, so isn't that interesting, because you have so many kind of on the environmental left that are opposing this when you're essentially suggesting that there will be great beneficial environmental impact? Huge benefits.
You could have, for example, a complete, the fleet could be entirely electrified if you wanted to do it that way, because essentially they would be able to drive themselves off and get themselves charged up without anybody monitoring them. I'll be able to speak someday.
Yeah. Well, and so as you investigate this technology, what's the time horizon you see for this really coming online in a meaningful way, where people not just kind of notice the Google cars roaming around or people beta testing the Uber driverless cars like they are in Pittsburgh, but really see this as a viable mode of transportation for folks?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I'm a fairly technologically optimistic person, and I've investigated this, and there are a lot of very wise people who say, oh, no, car infrastructure takes a long time to modify and so forth. I think actually the rollout is going to be much more like cell phones. The doubling times are going to be less than 2 or 3 years, and people will see these cars on the highways and in the cities in less than 5 years, fairly ubiquitously at that point.
And one of the other arguments that have been offered, or not argument, but perspective, is there's manufacturing associated with the production of this new technology and these driverless cars. And so, for example, in Illinois, we've had the president of the Illinois Manufacturing Association say, yeah, I welcome the technology. I'd love to have those vehicles manufactured in Chicago or Illinois.
Well, I assume that everybody would like to have these jobs, because it's going to be something, it will be a way of replacing a lot of the transportation system, and there'll be a lot of jobs associated with it in deploying it, at least for the next couple of decades. So, why wouldn't you want these jobs?
Right, and it just speaks to the argument that the central planners like Ed Burke make about you're going to lose all these driver jobs. Well, yeah, there's going to be some flux. There's no question, and this is not to be cavalier about people who drive a vehicle for a living, a delivery driver or what have you. But then there's also the creation of all these jobs too. So you have to kind of look at both ends of it in a dynamic economy rather than looking at it statically.
Correct. I mean, if the point is to get people jobs, period, then if you want to do that, why don't you just make them build pyramids and then tear down pyramids?
Right. Yeah, it's the old Milton Friedman line about instead of people using shovels or backhoes to build roads, just give everybody a teaspoon and you'll have full employment.
Exactly.
All right. He is Ronald Bailey. He's a noted author and Reason Magazine science correspondent. His latest book, The End of Doom, Environmental Renewal in the 21st Century. Ron, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me. Take care now.